Hey everybody, Tag Life Done Free. Hey, we're back to continue on our group discussion. And if you guys recall, we talked in the very first video was just kind of a general overview. And then we talked about the mind, which is the circle of like-minded people, the biggest circle. After that, we talked about the crew. Then we talked about the mag. In our last video, we began the discussions about the crew, which is your small center section. And we left off on a leadership conversation and a financial decision-making conversation. And so we'll start back there. But before we do, I would like to welcome back Mr. Data. Welcome, Data. Mr. Bobby Spags. And of course, Mr. Hitch. How's it going, everybody?
Excellent. How about yourself?
Well.
Paradise.
Yeah, Hitch, you're kind of turned into Bigfoot a little bit, something everyone's heard about, but no one's ever seen.
This is true.
Probably by design.
Yeah. All right, Bobby. So where we leave off in the last one?
We were talking about governance and sovereignty and how you establish rules or don't have rules and where the boundaries were between individual sovereignty and group collectivity.
Yeah, well, I think our next stop was to talk about inside that group, how you deal with money, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you want to talk to us a little bit about how, in your opinion, money should be dealt with?
Sure. Of course, this is going to be completely dependent on the kind of group you have. But in most groups, you're going to have one or two guys or gals or families who own the bug out location. And if you have somebody that owns the bug out location, if you're that kind of a group, then there needs to be a sense of ownership amongst all your members, at least in my opinion. Now, of course, you have to be careful what words you use because the State Gaming Commission doesn't like it when you step out of boundaries. But you can have a membership fee, and that membership fee can cover the purchase of communal items. Where this gets tricky is balancing what is considered a communal item and what is considered to be the individual responsibility of the people within your group. And that's a very long conversation to have. It's a conversation that should evolve over time. You're never going to get it right the first time. My group has gotten pretty close, I would say. We have a very good system down at this point. We've been using this system for 17 years, and it hasn't failed us once. Even when we've had moments where it brought up questions and even potential conflict, we were able to scrap that conflict very quickly and move on.
Yeah, so you talked about your group now without, obviously breaking OPSEC or any of those kind of things. Do you have some highlights of how you guys do it?
Sure. What we have basically is a vestment period. So every person is required to pay $10 per person per month for a 10-year period. And that is at the current rate of membership fee. So let's say for round math right now, it's $10 per person. My family has 6 people. I would be paying, as the head of my house, I would be paying $60 a month into the organization until I have become vested at 10 years. We went to the vestment period because we realized that life happens, and there are often times where people in our line of lifestyle just can't afford to spend the money that particular month on their membership fees. But it doesn't mean that ownership shouldn't take place, and it doesn't mean that you should encourage people not to pay in, right? So the compromise was a vestment period so that it didn't have to be rigid. It didn't have to be every single month. If you missed 3 or 4 months, it didn't matter. What matters is that eventually you hit that end goal of X amount of months at the current rate. Mm-hmm. All of us do it. We've been doing it, like I said, for almost 2 decades now. And there have been plenty of times where people couldn't pay and we just didn't care because, well, you'll get to it eventually. But every time you do pay, it doesn't pick up, at this month, it picks up where you left off and the squares keep getting checked. We agreed very early on terms of what was considered communal property and what was considered individual. For example, everybody is expected to take care of your own bug out bag, your own body armor, your own rifle, your own shotgun, your own ammunition, all of that stuff. What we generally spend it on is things like food, long-term storage food. So even though we have gardens at all of our locations, and even though at our main locations we have a very large garden and a bunch of animal husbandry, there's also the mindset that you never know what will happen with that stuff. So you should always prepare for all the centric rings of need. And so we generally spend it on things like food. If we put let's say a ham radio at a place, we'll collectively finance a certain portion of it. And then the homeowner is expected to finance the rest because they're going to use it prior to an event, right? they're going to learn it. They're going to put wear and tear on it. So we kind of tend to split things, and we always tend to hold a vote on what that percentage should be. Just things like that. But if it's something that you're going to use, that your family's going to use, that's your property, we don't spend collective money on that whatsoever.
Yeah, I've been aware of groups who did it similar. Just the only change would be that what they used the monies for was, group purchases, not food, not stuff like that. But like, let's say you have a range that needs new targets, or you need
That too, yeah.
a solar pump, or something that
Sure.
you don't need 37 harvest right grain meals, right? Those
Right.
kinds of things. But I'd be interested.
More bug out location centric purchases as opposed to individual purchases. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd be interested to hear from Hitch on this because, typically, which is the number one reason I asked him to be on this video series, looks at things often quite different. So Hitch, give us your take.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm more anarchist than Spags Unfiltered. So we're pretty loosely affiliated. The people that I work with or participate with in this type of a endeavor. We don't have any membership. We don't have any dues. We don't have those sort of assignments. There's some of us that have things that have means, and we've agreed to split purchases on stuff. We've just known each other for decades, so we've got a lot of trust there. And then the people that don't have the means, we've kind of just held them up, help them along. There's they're friends and family too, so we don't focus on that. I did have a question for Spags Unfiltered though, related to your dues. So you said 17 years and you were paying something like $10 a person. Was that I mean, obviously that's fiat currency and that was years ago. Do people still today pay that same rate, or have you adjusted for inflation since we've had that happen lately? Or
No, we haven't needed to.
No, okay.
No, if there's processes in place, should we decide we want to change what that rate is, but we haven't felt the need to, quite honestly.
Gotcha. You guys thought about using real money, or do you use
Yeah.
that folding?
Yeah, but you're not going to buy freeze-dried foods with that.
Gotcha.
At least not in most places. So yeah, we have precious metals and we have other things as well. We have alternate means. And there are times where some people who couldn't pay their membership fees, they would barter instead, and we'll accept barter at current market rate. So if somebody, let's say, can't pay their, like if there was a month I couldn't pay $60, I could pay the equivalent of that in silver coins or ammunition or stuff out of my private selection of things that the group would find interest in.
Yeah, Hitch, are you
It's
suggesting
all very fluid.
Hitch, are you suggesting we should use a prime plus method for dues?
I don't know.
That's
one of the reasons I find it difficult to measure things. I mean, anymore.
Yeah.
That the whole fiat currency thing is just way off the rails, and it's I mean, one of the families that I associate with, I worry about them, their struggle to buy gasoline, and their ability to do other things. And so I'm more along the lines of how do I get them involved where they feel that they've contributed, so they don't feel like they're in some way indebted to anybody. But likewise, I really try and make it a point with the people that I'm involved with that everyone feels square, like, hey, you okay with this? Is this, tell me now. I mean, I'm real big on, speak now or forever hold your peace. I don't want, 3 years from now, you tell me how you really had an axe to grind against me because you didn't feel like you were treated right. I try to make sure everybody I work with closely knows all that, I'd rather take care of somebody now and have them, in the future feel like I really did them square than them be upset with me later that they got, cheated in some way.
Yeah. Data, what's your take?
In the past, we've used, the like Spags mentioned, the moniker of different names. We've changed it from a club fee to a membership fee to a whatever, and we've utilized those across the board. Oftentimes, with a group consensus of what the fund should be diverted to. Like you'd alluded to before, perhaps it was a new set of range targets or a new group squeezo strainer or a harvest right, whatever for the, so having that ability to be able to maneuver inside your group with a portion of those funds or some type of funds, or having I guess, a larder of funds available. Because sometimes you stumble across, we've been in situations where we stumble across a ridiculous deal, that there's, this really great deal, but it might be like Brother Hitch alluded to. Right now is a weird time, and Billy and Susie can't afford gas, but man, they really, they're going to miss out because they don't have the funds right now to divert to the stew. But we've got this group larder, of these club fees that we've collected over time that allows them to still participate. And in other models, we've used it where your labor, or maybe some type of barter system in an alternate economy that we've created on our own outside of the fiat currency system, where you're exchanging your labor for goods or services, or some type of financial exchange inside the group. So I think it's really dependent on what your end goal is. I think what you and your group of people in your concentric rings are trying to achieve. If you are trying to build this giant, barter system of counter economy, counterculture, alliances and mutual assistance groups, then set out about to do that. Don't beat around the bush. So having this availability, I think it's a great idea for, especially like in these times like we're living in now, for people to maybe look at that if they're not doing that, and creating some type of system where they've got an alternate bartering method for currency like this. So
yeah, I think what's interesting about this is I think the purpose of a fee or whatever is, several folds. I think on the front, I'm sure you guys would agree, it's about buying those things collectively that you don't need individually. That's really based around the community. But I think there's another part to this too, which it's really about having skin in the game. It's about getting people to have skin. And so to me, the single best way to get people to have skin is sovereignty. Which is why, my viewers know that I've been pumping all the time about, here's a piece of land for sale, here's this, here's that, because it's all about, if I can get 500 families in a 20-mile radius that all own something, right? I don't think I have to work very hard to get them vested or to get them, into the community. But all right, David, so we finished with you last time. Let's start with you. So who controls the power of the purse? How's the money spent?
That's always a hot topic, and the majority of the forums and groups that we've discussed this in the past, because oftentimes he who controls the purse controls the direction of the group or the circle. And so having the ability to bend people's will based on the purchases that you make can be a make or break thing, I think, for your potential group or your potential, I guess, end goal. And so generally in the past, we've handled it in type of a sort of a committee type role, where there's 2 to 3 people that kind of steer the direction of that fund. Or oftentimes, like in the sense of the conversation we were having just a few minutes ago, it's a unanimous decision, to make sure that Billy and Susie don't feel excluded in this great purchase. Collectively, the council or whatever it is that guides your particular purse might just decide to include Billy and Susie. So I think it's relevant to your end game, what you're trying to achieve, and whether or not you're actually getting people to participate, because that's really a kind of a hard thing. Like you'd mentioned a minute ago, Tag, having skin in the game, or having people to collectively want to have skin in the game, or actively pursue putting skin in the game on their own without others in the group having to force them, or make them feel obligated, morally obligated or socially obligated to do so. That's often a hard thing to do. Most people barely want to get off the couch, let alone go out and actively participate in this thing that might save their life someday.
Yes, I think what's interesting about that, and this is to Hitch, because Hitch is the self-proclaimed super anarchist amongst the group. Without governance, without skin in the game, how do you keep people involved?
Well, I mean, you just stay engaged, be seen, make contact. Some of my people are way far away. They're not nearby. So they're contributing financially more often than they're contributing physically. Excuse me. The people that are more local, getting them engaged is not as hard because they're, they're nearby. You know,
Yeah, but
that answer
doesn't
your
that,
question?
yeah, well, it does, except doesn't that make it where you have to drive the bus all the time versus people being self-engaged, right? People driving on their own. I mean, if I've got to call somebody every single time, I mean, I've got so much stuff going on. As I know, Hitch, you're one of the busiest guys I know. So, I recognize this, but how do you keep them engaged without having to drive the bus? That's the hard part to me. This is the interesting dynamic in your thought process.
I would really question how that differs, from Spags' process. I mean, and they still have to schedule meetings, schedule work days, schedule events. I mean, it's really kind of the same thing. I mean, if somebody falls off the map for me because they're not, not returning calls, not answering, not participating, it starts to get pretty simple of like, well, I guess they don't want to, be a part of this anymore. They got something going on in their life. Whereas I don't know, I would flip it back over to you guys and say, okay, if someone's paying dues, I mean, how long do you beat on their door to tell them to show up before, you say, hey, maybe this isn't a good fit for you?
Yeah,
I
well,
mean, people either want to be engaged or not.
Yeah, well, I think in both Spags' example and your example, I think that becomes a lot more challenge. I think in the idea of sovereignty, it's not hard at all. I mean, I think that is the ultimate. If you could get to the absolute ultimate, it's 500 acres and a whole bunch of 40 acres that are all wrapped up, right? They're vested. But Spags, you want to address what Hitch said and then talk a little bit about power of the purse?
I think Hitch is absolutely right when he says his example and mine ultimately are the same. Mm-hmm. And frankly, once again, we've reverted. We're talking about problems from the mag in the first circle. In the inner circle, this shouldn't be a problem. You shouldn't have to drive the bus in the inner circle.
Yeah.
Once somebody gets to the inner circle, you should have a certain level of trust. I mean, you've vetted these people. We've gone through 4 or 5 other episodes of this where we've talked about those 2 circles. I don't have this issue in the inner circle. I've never had this issue in the inner circle. And whether you get skin in the game through labor or barter or money, the fact is that every society in the history of the world has ultimately used hierarchies because hierarchies work, and they ultimately use forms of exchange because forms of exchange work. So whatever that form of exchange is, be it barter, fiat, gold, silver, trade, whatever, ultimately it makes no difference to me. I could sit down with all 3 of you in spite of how we do things a little different and fellowship with every one of you and have a drink with every one of you, and I have no doubt that in a world after the zombies rise, if Hitch's loosely affiliated confederacy and my more hierarchical structure group met in a field, we'd shake hands and we'd work on common goals together. Mm-hmm. Because we've moved past that. We're no longer in the outer circle. We're not in the mag anymore. This is the crew, man. It doesn't matter. If you've got an issue in the crew with somebody who just doesn't want to show up anymore, you didn't vet them right to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but things change in people's lives, right?
Well, sure, but that's why we instituted the vestment program. So if you decided to take some time off, pay when you can, man. We understand everybody burns out. I mean, shit. Under Obama, we all burn out. We all were so hitting things heavily that by the time we had a little reprieve, a lot of people took it.
Yeah.
Some of us didn't, but a lot of people did.
Yeah.
And so you're right. Things happen, which is why even with the hierarchy, you have to have it kind of loose, because if you make it too rigid, then no one's going to want to participate in that.
I think that I can speak to your question a little better now that I've had time to think about it. You said I'm driving the bus. I mean, I am. I really am. I mean, because at the end of the day, like you said, I'm super busy. I'm the one that has, a big chunk of land. I'm the one that has, big chunks of various livestock. I'm the one that has to do that every single day. And the other members know that and count on it. And likewise, I know that any one of my tribal members that I contact, like I could pick up the phone right now and call them and say, hey, I need X, and I know which person to call for X. One of the people that's farther away, I can't rely on that person to, be here immediately to help me pull a tractor out of a mud hole or something, right? So one of the other people, I know that they'll show up immediately. They'll drop what they're doing and be here. But the person that's farther away, I can say, hey, I need $5,000 because I come across this deal and I already, I'm into it. That individual will send me the money, no questions asked. Yeah. But they all rely on me to get up every day and take care of the livestock and take care of the land. They don't question in their mind that I'm doing that every day. They know that that'll be there.
Yeah. Well, but you're doing that every day because that's one part of how you make your living,
Bingo.
right?
Yeah.
That's kind of what I mean by being by having sovereignty. Right? Nobody has to motivate you to get up in the morning to go take care of your livelihood, right?
Right.
Right.
That comes supernatural, right? Which is kind of what I meant by that. Bobby, real quick. So talk about accountability when it comes to the financial part of a group.
Again, I'll speak to how I do things. In my theoretical group, we have a treasurer that's an elected position. It's not appointed. And we have that person who has to account for all monies.
Mhm.
All purchases, receipts are kept. All purchases are only made in cash. And the safe, if we had one full of money, would be kept separately from the command structure of the group. So let's say I was elected this particular cycle as the commander of our group. I have the ability as the commander to arbitrarily spend up to $100 at a time.
Mhm.
Let's say I'm just using round numbers. It's actually different than that. But if I come across that deal, like what Data was talking about, I can make the purchase and I don't have to call anybody because I'm allowed up to a certain percentage. But in order to make it, I have to get a hold of the right people. They're like, yeah, you can do it. I make the purchase on my card. I bring the receipt back. I get reimbursed. Anything larger than that, let's say that whatever that amount is, goes to a vote and majority wins.
Mhm.
And luckily, we vetted our group all those years ago well enough to where we generally don't disagree. We all kind of have the same mentality of what we should be spending money on. And if someone comes across something that's, let's say, a hell of a deal, it's not hard to make a case for something to people you've already been doing this with for almost 2 decades. It's pretty easy, really. I mean, most of this is actually very easy once you get to this stage. And then on the few times where someone might disagree, you give them the opportunity to state why they disagree, and maybe they change your mind. Maybe they don't.
Mhm.
But ultimately, I believe in division. You can't have all the money in one place with all the authority in one place and all the ability to buy in one place. And you never have a bank account. You never buy with a card. Everything has to be purchased with cash. That way it's real-time transactions, regardless of what you're spending. And that way you don't have one person can't just take the group's card, if you were silly enough to have such a thing, and just start swiping. You can't have somebody with unlimited funds. That's exactly how you get the problems that Data was talking about earlier. So you divide it. You divide the responsibility up, you divide the ability up, and then you make clauses for exceptions and that sort of thing, and you just go that way.
Go ahead, Hitch.
Mags, would you be interested in a conglomeration of me and my friends managing your money for you and making decisions on interest rates for you arbitrarily? We could be sort of like a reserve organization.
Not with interest, no. We don't do interest.
Like the
But if
Federal
I trusted
Reserve.
you as a friend, and I mean, look, you trust me. I've held on to parts of your money before, and we're not even in the same group. So if you're in my group, yeah, I would absolutely let you hold my money.
I was making a Federal Reserve joke.
I know you were.
Mhm.
This isn't Facebook, man. You can't bait me.
Well, I think so, Hitch, in your particular example of how it would all run, if there was a great buy, like let's say a semi-load of 2x6s come up and you had to make a decision, you just make the decision and figure it'll work itself out. Right?
I mean, ultimately, yes.
Yeah. Data, you got anything you want to comment on this power of the purse thing before we move on to leadership?
No, not that I haven't covered already. No.
So real quick before we go on, so when a member of a group should have some responsibilities for themselves, right? That they have to have, Bobby mentioned earlier, their own rifle, their own, whatever. Data, what are some of the things you think that should be on the community member versus on the group to provide?
Oh man, that's a no-brainer. In the very beginning of setting out to build your whatever it is, that you should establish those things like we'd mentioned earlier. So by the time you get to this point in your group or in your inner circle, a lot of those things have already been worked out. But for the people that are trying to build something or don't really understand how it works or haven't been there yet, I mean, it's obvious the staples like your medications that you require for a day-to-day basis. your personal hygiene items, toothbrushes, if you prefer a bidet over baby wipes, whatever it is, make sure that you're taking care of yourself and your family, on those levels of things, or your inner circle, because right, there's rings within rings, and there's rings within those rings, just like there's known knowns and unknown unknowns and such and so forth. So having that foresight to have some just basic staples, like your ability to protect your life, your wife, and your wallet, and then provide in that same sense for yourself, your family. I think that's just a no-brainer.
Hitch, you got a comment?
I mean, I've really big believer in that if you've got a location that's is your fallback location, such as I have, and all the other members, I tell them it's imperative that you keep certain things here, because a lot of people have this illusion that they're going to load up their truck and their trailer and their horses and their goats and their sheep and their chickens and everything that they've laid out and prepped for, and they're going to come here in some big massive convoy. And I mean, I feel like if something bad happens, you're going to be lucky to get here with the shirt on your back.
Prepper porn.
Yeah, I mean, that's just this grim reality. And so if you got kids, or make sure you got underwear that they're going to grow into,
Yes.
I mean, we might be able to scare up some extra pants and shirts and stuff like that, because I think it's important to go buy that stuff for kids to grow into. And you're going to end up having kids show up that you didn't know you're going to have show up, but whatever. And work gloves and boomsticks, things like that. So yeah, people are responsible for that on their own. But at the same time, back to my more common theory that I have in my world, I make plans on having some things for some people too that I know that maybe they can't afford or whatever. And again, at the end of the day, if those people never show up, or something bad never happens, I bought those things, are my things.
Bobby, you want to add?
No, I think he's absolutely right. I'm so glad he brought up future underwear and future socks, because one thing I found while doing the expos all those years was that nobody thought about that. Like, I actually remember Hitch and I sitting in some dude's class at like the 4th or 5th one of those shows, making fun of some of the folks who were like, I never thought to put back underwear. And then the guys who were like, I never thought to put back underwear for a year from now. I'm like, if you've got kids who are 4 to 5 years old and you're not buying stuff for 7, 8, 9, 10, I mean, my wife and I and everybody we know, not even just in our group, but the sorts of people I surround myself with, we all keep all the kids' clothes. We don't go to Goodwill. We don't put them in a yard sale, and we move that stuff. Hell, Hitch's kids have some of my old uniforms from the Army because it fits them. It doesn't fit anybody in my crew, right? So I'm like, hey, Hitch, do you think, some people you might know want these? Yeah, he'll take them. I don't care. But yeah, I'm glad Hitch brought that up, because that's part of the concentric circles too, is taking care of each other with that very thing. Because that's the one thing that's going to wear out hard. People don't get it. You're working on that homestead every day right now, but when you have 20 people working on that homestead every day, sun up to sundown, your shit's going to wear out really fast.
I think that's, Bobby, didn't we just talk about that? That's like number 1 or number 2 on those lists, like from books and stuff that people have lived through conflicts have had.
Number 1 was socks and underwear. Number 2 was ways to make fire, because no one thinks about just putting some Bic lighters in a drawer. And then number 3 were booze and cigarettes and drugs. Those are the top 3 categories of things people need in a pending disaster.
Right. And based on, just so that our viewers understand, books, letters, and things written by people who had lived through wars, lived through, Holocaust and things of that nature.
Well, the guy's name was Sadelko. That was his code name online. He was a Bosnian, and he wrote his experiences based on the war from 93 and 94, and how he watched entire cities implode on themselves, and the Serbs didn't even have to come in and take them because the people just turned on each other. And he was the one who came out with socks, underwear, methods of fire, booze, cigarettes, and alcohol, in that order.
Yeah, just kind of to your point, I prefer to work in tennis shoes. Always have, probably always will. I own boots, lots of different kinds of boots. But if I'm just going to be out and about, picking stuff up, doing this, that, I prefer to work in tennis shoes. But I go through a pair of tennis shoes every month here on the farm. every month.
Easily.
And because I wear tennis shoes and not hard boots most of the time, not always, but most of the time. I think the only thing that I would add to all of your guys' discussions is I think you got to take the responsibility of everything for you and your family in your own hands. I'm not expecting a group to store food for me.
Right.
Nor am
That's
I that's right. Nor am I expecting them to store it for my son and his son to someday to be wife and 1.3 kids. I've gotten a lot of, I don't want to say heat, but, questions on the channel about why do you have such a big house? I've got a 4,600 square foot house. But I did that because then all of my kids and their wives and their kids someday would all have a place to go. I built this house knowing my kids are coming home.
Yes.
We don't live in a lot of it, right? There's a whole bunch of my house we don't even live in. But I am preparing for the safety and security of my family, period. And I'm not expecting anybody else to do it for me.
Yes.
You've got more of a
Patriarchs have to do what
castle.
patriarchs have to do.
What's that, Hitch?
You got more of a castle than a house.
Yeah, and the Winchester house is the common joke. Thank you, Data. It's kind of gone on for years now, but probably will continue. But I literally think all the time. I'll give you some examples. So, like, I didn't just build them a bedroom; I built them a master suite, each of my kids, so that their kids could have a room right there close. They'd have their own bathroom, right? Those kind of things. Maybe I'm weird, but I just think you got to take the responsibility in your own hands. I do not have any anticipation, Hitch, whatsoever of anybody in my circle having to provide me anything. Now, that will happen because I can't think of everything.
Now I can counter that real easily.
Okay.
So back to one of the reasons I operate the way I do, I anticipate having to feed people.
Yeah.
And that's why I have to breed cattle and livestock and so forth for the long term, because that plan is always, how do you maintain a business now, upsize later, all these things, all the details of animal husbandry come into play, of maintaining livestock that's not interrelated so much that you decimate your future births and so on. So yeah, I actually do keep food for people that'll be here, like people I may not even know yet.
Yeah, well, I think that's smart. More what I'm referring to is that when you're planning for yourself, do your best to put yourself in a situation you never have to be a refugee. That's hard to do, right? I mean, it's not. I don't even know if any of us will ever truly get there. But I think the goal should be, I will take care of everything. Therefore, I can give back to my community. I don't have to be a refugee to my community.
I think that's where you start. That's where everyone
Right.
should start. And if you haven't started there, you probably shouldn't be in this part of the conversation with whatever it is that you're trying to do in your group.
Yeah.
If you're not at the point, at this point in the conversation where you already have those things situated and sorted, you're probably doing it all wrong.
Yeah.
And you're probably a part of the wrong group at this point.
Right.
Hopefully that's
Cards, horses, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, by the time you get to this part of the inner circle, hopefully all that's squared away. And again, back to Bobby's point, if you haven't vetted your people enough that you haven't found that out, holy shit, what were you doing?
Mhm. Yeah, well, it's hard though. The person you meet today is not the person you end. I mean, they've said this about divorce a million times. The person you marry is not the person you divorce.
Sure.
How
sure.
well, I mean, right? I mean, so people change. And so I think that's to say, well, we vetted them all correctly. I think that's short-lived because things happen. They just do, and that's the scary part to me. But anyway, let's talk about leadership. So Bobby, you talked a lot about your guys' group without giving anything up. You want to talk a little bit about leadership?
Yeah, I mean, titles can be what titles can be, and it can morph into whatever you want. And every group's going to be a little bit different. Like I mentioned last video, my group formed when I was still in the Army and my best friend was still in the Army. So we just kind of adopted what we knew.
Mm-hmm.
The terms are what the terms are, but honestly, there's no difference between a commanding officer and a president or a chairman or whatever the hell you want to call it. There's no difference between an executive officer and a vice president and a financial officer. They're all the same thing. It's just what you're comfortable with. Or even if you feel the need to have those at all. I know some groups that have a council. They don't even have elected leaders, and they've functioned just fine. My group has elected leaders. I think when you form your group, you will figure out what you need, right? If your group doesn't need that, then it doesn't need it. If your group does need that, then it does need that. And as long as there's as long as sovereignty is not interrupted and there's an opt-out feature without penalty, you can really form it however you want.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said before, the hierarchies work. There's a reason that even the greatest anarchist minds of our time today, whom I follow almost all of them, all still advocate for hierarchy, because you can't just have blobs that do nothing with no superstructure whatsoever. You have to have structure. But that's to each group how they want to do it. We tried to have a very small, I guess what you would call a command structure. We have 3 elected leaders: the guy in charge, the second guy in charge, and the treasurer. Now, underneath of that, we have committees, right? So let's say we have somebody who's really, really good at medical stuff. They naturally are going to fill the role of being in charge of the medical committee. And when this person figures out we need to maybe buy some of X, whatever that X might be, that person's who brings it up to the whole group, not me and not the guy in charge and not the treasurer.
Mhm.
We have the guy who might be our gunsmith, let's say, and it's his job to kind of figure out what we might need in that realm and make suggestions to the group of what they should be doing individually, and so on and so forth. And if you compartmentalize things down enough, you really don't even have a top-down structure at that point. You basically have a series of managers, which is ultimately what you should want as free people. You shouldn't want rulers. You shouldn't want tyrants. You shouldn't want people who are lording over you. You should be almost a business where everybody is in charge of a department, and the departments work together towards the goal your group is trying to achieve. And that's kind of how we have things set up.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, I wrote down on my notes when you were talking earlier, did you guys pick the word commander on purpose, or it was just because of what you knew?
Yeah, it's because at the time my best friend was my commander and I was his staff sergeant in the Army. So we just kind of, like I said, adopted what we knew. So commander and executive officer. We almost never even use those terms anymore until it's election time. And then it's like, well, I guess we got to write this on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
We've even entertained changing it. And the only reason we don't change it, quite frankly, is because we just don't take it that seriously enough where we need to change the words. They're on the piece of paper because they're on the piece of paper, for a lack of a better term. But it just, number 1 and number 2, one guy's in charge of making sure things happen. The other guy is the nuts and bolts, kind of like what you knew in the Army too, with a platoon leader and a platoon sergeant. Yeah. One is in charge of leading, and the other's in charge of the beans, bullets, and blankets and Band-Aids, who does all the logistics.
Yeah. Hitch, your comments on leadership?
Well, I'm a big believer in leaders step forward when they need to, right? So whether it's things related to medical, and there's a individual that I'm associated with who clearly is going to be a leader in that decision making, because that's what that individual does for a living every day. If, say, for example, your family and my family was together, your wife might be the leader of beekeeping, and because she's so immersed in it, or the leader of the kitchen, because she knows how to operate all that equipment better than anybody else. And so we don't have a Chairman Mao or a General Noriega or President Chavez here in our organization. I couldn't think of any historic commanders. Sorry, Mr. Spags. But
Sky Commander in the World of Tomorrow. Don't you watch TV?
General Powell. There's a lot of good ones out there.
Well, yeah, but like the dark, scary ones, like Chairman Mao, and I had to look up Stalin. He was General Secretary of the Communist Party. I thought that was too long, and Fuhrer
That's
just
a long title. Screw that.
Fuhrer just directly translates from German to English, means leader, so that was not very fun. But no, I just and again, the way I operate is, day to day, I'm, the head of the household and head of my business operation anyway. So again, there's not a lot of group decisions made there, but in a grid down Teotihuacan type situation, of course things change and people step forward to lead as necessary,
Yeah, Hitch, I'm actually going to go there next, is how does all of this change post-event? But before we do that, Data, your thoughts on leadership?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Leadership is crucial. I mean, everybody in this video call, everyone in this call knows that. I mean, if the bus does not drive itself, as we've alluded to during the course of this discussion so far. And as Brother Hitch pointed out, leaders do step up when the time presents itself for that field, or that particular person to shine. We all have a role. We all have, there's a right butt for every seat. And part of being a good leader, or part of being a leader in your own right, is knowing when to lead and when to follow. Mm-hmm. And so having the leadership structure in place, because going all the way back to the very beginning of this series of videos, going all the way back to tribalism, having some sort of tribal leader at the figurehead or mast of this, either a patriarch, matriarch, whatever it is, a council, however you establish it, it's crucial. Otherwise, none of this works. Because again, the bus, we all know it won't drive itself. It will sit there and it won't go anywhere, and everyone will point the finger at each other, and it just spirals out of control. So having leadership is crucial. And then again, having people that will back each other up as leaders in the group or the circle or council. Because again, like you said earlier, Tag, people's circumstances change, their life changes, whatever it is that's going on, whether they have some type of illness or a death in the family or a financial situation, it's going to happen. Whether it's today, tomorrow, or after the apocalypse, you're going to experience this point where you're not the leader anymore. And you have to check your own ego, and you have to remember that you're a part of a bigger thing. And that in order to be a part of this bigger thing, having that skin in the game from the very beginning, part of that was understanding your place, and that today you're the leader, but tomorrow you're the ditch digger, or you're the point man, or you're the tower guard, or you're the hoe, raker in the guard, whatever it is, right? So I think leadership's absolutely crucial.
Yeah. So how does leadership change post-event? Data?
Again, this is dependent upon you and your scenario, what you're trying to build. If you have a commander structure where it really depends, but I think you should have those parameters and those left and right boundaries established before you go down this path of saying, "Hey, we're all a group now," or let's just figure it out as we go. I think it's kind of a war general's council mentality after the fact. With again, maybe a sprinkled in mix of like Brother Spags had mentioned, some type of post-event election. Either you're the war general, you're the war commander, or you're the negotiation specialist, or whatever it is, you're the pacifist. You're going to have all these different types of leaders in your group, I hope. And all of them are going to have their specialities of where they shine or where they're effective. And so I think being able to recognize who should be the leader in that moment is again part of your strengths and weaknesses when you're building your group.
Pitch.
Well, I think that Data, brings a really strong point, and I'll just expand on that. Something that Spags and I have discussed. We're all alpha males here, right? I mean, there's no doubt about that. We've come together because of our mindset and mentality, and tip of my hat to them. Spags, the whole idea of having elected leaders and having some sort of preset, setup is pretty important, I think, heading into, a grid down event situation, because people know at least who's going to step up and say, okay, hey, I'm the one that was elected to be in charge. Whether that immediately changes once everyone gets together because they decide that it needs to or whatever, that's fine. But knowing who to go to first, to make some decisions and answer questions is pretty important. And then in turn, like Data said, being able to check your ego at the door and recognize that, okay, hey, I'm not that position. That's this other person's position. And if they say, hey, go dig a latrine for a while, I know that's my job. I'm going to go do it. And we'll move to the next step after that.
Yeah, I think that was well said, Bobby. Post-event leadership.
All of the above. Honestly, we don't know how it's going to work until it happens. But I think the more set up and structured you are now, the better of a chance you have to survive at least the initial event. And I think the most important thing that we've touched on this topic is the ego portion, because it's very difficult for especially men, especially alpha males, to know when to shut the fuck up. I don't always know when to shut up. And I know that everyone here has probably at least had one moment in their lives where they're like, man, I really overstepped. I probably should have shut up and didn't, right? This is where, as much as I don't support the idea of statism whatsoever, the one true lesson I can draw from the Army that I really learned to appreciate was, because the Army is so large and because there is such a diverse structure of leadership. And Tag, this, you have your company commander and your first sergeant, right? But then you have your 3 platoon leaders, your 3 platoon sergeants, then you have your headquarters platoon, and then you have all your sections, right? The supply section, the medical section, it is so diversified that no one person can actually just become an asshole tyrant and control everybody, because your support people will just step back and say, fine, do it yourself. I've watched people get torpedoed in the military because they were jerks and because they didn't know what they were doing. And all their support structure would like look at each other and just kind of take a step back and let them fall. And I think that's why we have to train super hard now, why you have to have the infrastructure now, and why you have to sweat and bleed and hurt together now, so that you've already experienced each other at your worst. Because if you haven't experienced, Hitch probably knows this better than probably any of us because of how hard he works out there. Like when you're out there busting your ass in the sun in August in Kansas, in that humidity and in that heat, and someone randomly walks up to you when you're in the zone driving T-post or building fence or working with cattle or whatever the case is, and they just interject, it'll snap you. Like you will get angry like almost instantly because you're hot, you're miserable. You'd rather be on a beach somewhere sipping a drink, whatever. We've all had to do that in the preparedness realm too. We've all gone out and done our big field exercises where we throw up tents and we bug out bag camp for 72 hours. You learn a lot about each other doing that. You learn a lot.
Yeah.
So sweat now, bleed now, hurt together now, want for things now, so that you have a lot better chance of surviving whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, I think I'd make 3 points to all of you guys' comments. The first thing is to Bobby's point right there is I've often thought about this whole exercise of working in a community and doing all this in peacetime is really nothing more than a gigantic interview. And I get to learn who can handle it when it's sweating and when it hurts, who can't handle it. I have 20-year-old kids come out to my farm to help all the time and they can't hang with me for a second. No, they ain't even close. And I think you get a chance to learn all of these things. And then to Data's point, you cannot lead if you cannot follow. That is impossible. And then the third point, anybody that volunteers to be the leader, I'd probably go another direction, because leadership is hard. You can't make everybody happy. It's just not a fun place to be, especially in the case of a grid down event, right? If you ain't got real good buds around you that you've really vetted well and that you really know well that would have your back, man, I don't know so much I'd want to be a leader. But all right, guys, let's talk about conflict mitigation, because we're going to be there, right? And I can speak miles about conflicts that go on inside the group. So Data, talk about conflict mitigation. What makes it hard and how do you do it?
Well, it's not hard, honestly. And it shouldn't be hard. It doesn't have to be hard, especially if everybody loves each other. If everybody's on the same team, if everybody's, pulling the rope in the same direction, it's not hard. Or it doesn't have to be hard. It gets hard where those alpha males, like we talked about earlier, or maybe some of those beta males that wish they were alpha males, can't check their ego, or vice versa. So when people find themselves at odds, especially in these inner circle conflicts, which they do arise. I mean, you're going to have outer circle conflicts, inner circle conflicts, just like you have, intermarital conflicts and whatever, fill in the blank. So being able to navigate those conflicts internally, it usually it falls upon one person saying I'm sorry and the other person saying I'm sorry too. But if both people in that equation can't do that equally and mean it, it's not going to happen. You're not going to mitigate anything. You're just going to pour salt on the wound. So having an arbitrator helps. Having someone with the specialty skills in their in your group of being a conflict mitigator, or being someone that's good at bringing people together and saying let's mend the olive branch. That's nice. But not everybody gets that. Not everybody has that. So really, again, it's going to be dependent upon your circle, your group, and again, what your goal is. If your group goal is to just have a loose confederacy of people that work in a mag, then you're probably not even really worried about this. So conflict mitigation in the inner circle is going to be really dependent upon, again, I think, really how you set your leadership structure up. Because I think that's going to dictate, again, the roles and the positions that people take in these types of situations, where it's not a he said, she said, or it's not a, this one pointing the finger at this one. It's all right, guys, we got shit to do. Let's get over this and move on. We're all on the same page. We all still have the same mission. Let's hug it out and sally forth.
Mm-hmm. Spags, go ahead.
You have to ask yourself, what's the goal? Is the goal to be right? Or is the goal to solve the problem?
Mm-hmm.
And you have accidentally surrounded yourself with people who only care about being right, you're doomed. Because when all you care about is being right, and I speak from experience, I've been that guy. I've been the guy who thought he had to be right. It doesn't lead anywhere. It certainly sucks for a marriage. I can't imagine what it would be like for a group of 20, 30 people, half of which are alpha dudes. You're never going to achieve anything. So part of the vetting process has to be, are you bringing in people who you are reasonably assured are more interested in solving a problem than just winning an argument? And like Data said, your leadership structure can be part of this. There have been 2 times in my group's history where we had a major blowout, like a real issue. And it generally took somebody else stepping in calmly and being the voice of reason, to kind of separate antagonistic, parties and make people cool down. But Data is also right that at this level, it shouldn't be that hard. We make it hard, I guess.
Can you expand more details about the blowout?
Well, you see, there was this tire and it got driven over some nails. No, it was an evolution in the group's phase, how we were transitioning from something to another, if we needed a transition, and it was over somebody who just stopped showing up and didn't do what we thought they should be doing. They're carrying their fair share. And so there was a pretty big, to do about how we would handle it. And it, took several months worth of us getting together and discussing it. And finally the situation righted itself.
And your group survived to the other side.
Absolutely.
I mean, I've heard of groups that fell apart over a bowl of cereal.
Well, there are also churches who the half the population went with this preacher and half went with that preacher because the building committee couldn't agree on a carpet color, which is why you really should be careful who you're surrounding yourself with in this particular circle. But egos are egos. And frankly, I'll speak just to my gender. Men are men, and we can be kind of bullish at times. And so there have been more than one time where someone's wife had to step in as the calm voice and saying, all right, guys, this isn't going anywhere. We're going to, and that, to what Hitch was saying, they stood up in that moment and became the leader because the leaders fell from grace temporarily, right? I was that guy. I was a very angry dude there at a certain portion of my life. Hitch probably knows that more than anybody in this call, because him and I used to have some really long conversations about it, and there were times where I needed someone else just to kind of push me to the side a little bit, gently but firmly, and say, all right, you're going to take a back seat for about the next 30 minutes.
Yeah. Hitch, you got any comments on that? Conflict mitigation?
Yeah. So to be specific, we're talking about conflict mitigation today or after an event?
Today.
Today. Sure. I have not come across a whole lot of conflict in the people I associate with. I would say that, and for gosh sakes, anyone out there that knows me, I am not necessarily speaking directly about you, okay? But just in general in my life, conflicts have seemed to arise from outside events, outside factors, and this is one of the reasons we need to have the vetting, because you need to know ahead of time what you're getting into. If someone is a drug addict, an alcoholic, or that they've got a spouse that's a real problem, things like that, can rear their ugly head later on. And knowing about these things ahead of time and just being good at conflict resolution in general, maybe you yourself stepping up as a leader covertly to be that person, such as Spags mentioned, the wife and the mom stepped in and said, hey guys, settle down. If you can be the person that says, hey guys, you may not know this, but I know that so-and-so over here is having this problem at home, or their husband fell off the wagon, or their wife is back on the sauce, or their kid's really sick and no one needs to know about it yet, or whatever. Because it just seems like there's a lot of times where conflict arises from an outside source, and then it, like Bobby said, you're working up there and you're hot and you're sweaty, and someone comes up and says, hey, I want to talk about this right now. Hey, I'm effing busy. Now's not the time. So yeah, being wise, being smart, being patient. that has just been my biggest tool for conflict resolution. Being able to do that thing like in Fiddler on the Roof, where he goes where there's a conflict and he's like 3 miles away and he's going, on the other hand, but on the other hand, and he's weighing it out in his mind. It takes like 15 minutes of the movie, the musical, and then he comes back with a solution. And being able to do that rapidly in your brain, to take that step back and not pick a side immediately or not start shouting or yelling immediately, but just to take a look at everything going on and trying to figure that resolution out. Tag, I think that you're really good at that. In my observations of you in your professional life, you are supremely attuned to rounding up cats and solving problems between people. And every chance that any of us get to put that into practice is important, because when life and death are at hand, it's going to be a big deal. But for right now, it's, you got to stay friends with these people. You got to get along with them now.
Yeah.
I think that's all I get to say.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to this. I think, well, first of all, Hitch, thank you for the compliment. I've spent 25 years herding cats. I've got a lot of experience at it, for my professional career. But I think there's a couple things that I wanted to point out. The first thing is we talked a lot about, because of a bunch of alpha males, but my experience inside of group, it's the alpha females that have more impact on the conflict, both creating the conflict and also the conflict resolution, than the guys ever will. I mean, every single person on this video, guys, has irritated me at one point in time. Every single one of these guys. And I've had, I don't want to say arguments, but, firm conversations with all three, right? And back to me too, because there's certainly at least half of those arguments were my fault, something that I did. So I think that just to point out the thing about, the female side of this has a large impact. You talked about the bowl, Hitch. That was really driven on too many women in a kitchen someday. And it just escalated over time. I know all about this example, right? It just escalated over time. And the straw was the bowl or whatever. The other thing that I want to say is the art, I think, to conflict mitigation is, first of all, having your priorities in the right place. If you put the community first, you can set a lot of that little stuff aside. There's things that my wife, B, and you guys know I love her very, very much. She asks of me or wants me to do that I think is the silliest, most unimportant, but I do it because it makes her happy and I don't really care, right? So it's about being tolerant. It's about, like Bobby, as you said, I don't have to be right. It's fine. Are we going to get to the same place? It's fine. It's not that big a deal. So I think that's just really what I would add to that is, just try to be tolerant. Hitch, your word, patience. There's a million times on the middle of something and my wife comes out with something that's super important. She wants to tell me about her tomato grew in a funny shape. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm trying to hang this piece of drywall. Can't you tell? But still taking that time to be tolerant and to be patient. I think all of those comments are good. Well, guys, hey, we're going to wrap it up right here for today. So you guys know there are three more things that we're going to want to talk about in the last video, which will be dealing with members who come and go, OPSEC, new membership, and then what does the average month look like? And we'll cover all of those in the next video. So before we go, on the way out, Data, what's your final words, bud?
Tag, thanks for having us all in this series. This has been very, very helpful. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yep. Hitch, you got any final words?
Just try to be a better man every day or a better woman every day. I mean, I can't stress that enough.
Yeah, and that's hard to do. Bobby?
One of my favorite lines from a song says, "Be careful whose advice you buy, but be patient with those who supply it. Advice is a form of nostalgia, and dispensing it is a way of fishing the past from the disposal, wiping it off, painting over the ugly parts, and recycling it for more than it's worth."
Man, I don't know how any of us add to that.
It's a great line.
Yeah.
If you're watching an opinion-based video, understand that we all eventually are going to the same place. So it's advice. Take it for what it's worth.
Yep. I think my parting words were, like many of us have always said, prepping leads to homesteading, homesteading leads to freesteading. Go be a freesteader, live a little bit freer today than you did yesterday. Hold the line. Don't give it in. See you guys.